Hi, everyone. It's Jenny and Laurie again, and we're here to talk about the Scorpio New Moon. And I'm going to let Jenny give you all the details of that in a minute. Before we get there, I just want to say, if you like our videos, please subscribe, like, and leave us messages. We really love that. Give us some information about how the information we give you resonates with you, and even what you'd like to see us talk about in future videos. So Jenny is from Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her at hiddenpathastrology.com, and you can find me at lauriefarrington.com. We both do consultations, teaching, and you can find us on social media platforms as well. For this new moon video, the only other thing I want to say is that there'll be a link below. You can get a new moon workbook for each new moon on Etsy. And do you have anything else that you offer? Well, you've got your seasonal meditations, which are really, really helpful. Go to Jenny's website to get those. Am I missing anything else?
Actually, yeah, there's going to be some holiday discount sale type of thingies coming up, but also I'm rolling out a workshop schedule for early in the new year. So it's not up yet, but pay attention because that'll be up if you're interested in in-person workshops because you happen to live in the area where I live. That's it though.
And where is this area where you live, Jenny?
It's near Lake Champlain in Vermont, near Burlington, Vermont. Yeah.
All right. Good to know.
Thank you.
So welcome to those of you who haven't been here before, and we're gonna blast into this. So Jenny, what the heck? Why do we pay attention to new moons?
Well, just as a reminder to some and maybe something new for others, the new moon is the beginning of the moon phase cycle, and it happens every month. It's always a time of excitement where the moon and the sun are in the exact same zodiac sign. And that's what it means. They come together. They're exactly conjunct from our point of view on Earth. It looks like they're right there together. In this case, it's happening in Scorpio. So we're in Scorpio season. And the new moon is really a time when you can think about planting a seed for a new process that you'd like to see unfold in the next 4 weeks. It also has a longer version where you can think about planting a seed that is going to go into a 6-month process that you'll see some sort of fruition at the Scorpio full moon, which is in April. So the shorter cycle, we plant the seed. Hopefully the seed cracks open and the roots go down and this plant starts to grow, or that's our analogy at least. And you start, as far as the moon, you see the light growing, you see that beautiful little crescent moon, and then it starts to grow into a half moon, which happens 1 week later. Another week goes by and we're at the full moon. And in the plant cycle, the full moon is similar to the flower blooming, where you see that beautiful blossom and you get to kind of see the fruits of your labors of the past couple weeks, is really what the full moon's about. And then at that point, it switches. We start losing light. The cycle starts moving towards its closing point, which happens 2 weeks later. And that part of the cycle is all about the meaning of the first half of the cycle. Like the first half, you're building and creating. And then the second half, you're kind of like reflecting, like, what did I build? What did it mean? Who did it impact? Who needs to learn from this process? And then as you bring the process to a close and you have that dark moon, you no longer can see the moon anymore. You're kind of putting all that material into the fertile soil, so to speak, for the next cycle. So that's kind of a little reiteration of how the cycle works.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
Well, the only thing I want to add to that is because Jenny and I really, our focus, you might not realize it by watching these videos, but our focus really is on natal astrology. And I just want to add, the fact that the phase of the moon that you were born under is really, really significant. And we're not going to go all into that right now, but if you don't know the phase of the moon that you were born during, that's a very interesting exploration. And it's something that probably both of us talk about when we do consultations with our clients. So, if you're interested in that, get in touch.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because one other thing I want to say is we do focus on natal astrology, just like Laurie just said. And so that means that it's very important to know a little bit about your own chart to know if this particular Scorpio new moon, is it hitting you in a sensitive point in your chart? Because that's when it really makes a difference, more so than usual. I mean, if you don't have any sensitive points at between 20 to 22 degrees of fixed signs, for example, like this might not be as big a deal for you. But boy, if this is landing on your moon or on Mercury or something like that, like you may really feel this one. And I just really want to reiterate that our focus is natal astrology. And so that means, where is this Scorpio stuff triggering or bothering or impacting your chart, the natal planets in your chart. So yeah.
And that's, and that's the reason why certain new moons, certain full moons impact different people in different ways. It's easy for somebody to say, well, that didn't mean anything to me. Nothing happened that day. Well, maybe it didn't hit on any particular point in your chart. So yeah, that's a good point. So I'm glad we brought that up.
Yeah, because I think that's important in what Lori and I are trying to do here with Astropath is really about you and how these impact you and how to use this stuff and how to make little shifts in your life that can really work with these things. So, okay. Shall we start talking about, so we're talking about the Scorpio new moon today, November 13th. It's happening at, I think, 4:27 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So alter for your time zone to know exactly where that's going to land.
It's actually daylight savings time now, EDT, right?
No, it's the other. We're done with daylight savings. We're on EST. So so standard time. Yep, we just switched the clocks in this crazy country that switches clocks. But whatever.
Oh my God, I get so confused, and I've been trying to set up an appointment with somebody in Australia, and it gets really confusing when we're in one time zone and they don't change time zones. Anyway, here we go. Let's open up the chart of the moment of the new moon, and here we've got that. This is a powerful new moon. I mean, we're talking about it here so far in our little intro, just like, oh, it's a little new moon. Well, this is a powerhouse. This is a supercharged new moon. Why is that, Jenny?
Oh my goodness. Well, we have the sun and the moon. First of all, it's conjunct Mars. So sun and moon are at 20 degrees of Scorpio, and Mars is just 22, so it's very much in the mix. For those of you who use the ancient rulers, and Lori and I both do, Mars is ruling the Scorpio. Mars is very, very strong in Scorpio, and both the sun and the moon are looking to Mars going, hey, what do we do with the Scorpio energy, Mars? How do we handle it? And Mars is sort of saying, you're going to have to take some kind of action. There's something important here that you're going to have to act on. Now, the thing we're going to talk a lot about is you're going to need to get clear about what that action needs to be before taking it. There's a strong desire to just take some kind of quick action here. And that's not, it's more of a little bit of a pause, let the internal process, the kind of inward facing component of Scorpio, take you on a little bit of an inner journey so that you can understand what is the core grain of truth or kernel of knowledge that is buried in a bigger, more reactive, dramatic experience. So you're really going to want to be honing in on that core piece, because exactly it is in a very, very tight opposition with Uranus. It's right between the two. So,
and I mean, you put Mars and Uranus together, and we've got very volatile energy. So, what Jenny just said, what you just said, Jenny, about pausing and not taking fast action is not necessarily going to be easy, because the inclination is, oh my God, Uranus and Mars are in this opposition, and an opposition always brings a moment of clarity, a point of clarity. You see something you hadn't seen. And this is, it's very, very volatile. It's very intense. It's very uncomfortable. So you want to pay attention. What is it? What is it you're seeing? And how are you going to respond? Because with Mars there, you have to respond. And with it being a new moon, the natural response, the best response is to plant a seed for making the change that you see needs to be made.
Yeah. That really tells.
You can't just jump into the deep end. I mean, you can, but you're not. That would not be well advised.
Yeah, so it's just not helpful. I mean, there's definitely that danger here of making some kind of super intense volatile action. But because you're watching this video, you're having a heads up, and that could be something that was tempting. But the best case here is that you take the time to kind of understand what is the stark truth in the middle of that perhaps disruptive or awakened kind of state that comes to you that feels, disruptive.
Yeah.
You kind of want to hone in on what is that core piece that is
Right.
really at the center of it before you take action.
And
That's kind of
the piece that kind of I really like that comes into this as well is after the moment of the new moon, we come to that opposition. And then shortly thereafter, there's a trine to Neptune. So that to me really suggests, okay, if you can resist that instant, fast, disruptive action, you can come into a place of acceptance and maybe compassion. You can work with it in a better way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that really holds the potential for offering a more healing to the situation. Like something happens, you wake up to it, you kind of have a little bit of a rumination about it, and then you make a decision of what type of empowered action you need to take. And then this settling process after what you're describing here, which is, great, the moon trining Neptune, of like, okay, how does this help my healing? How does this support me in some kind of process of where I can find forgiveness, or I can find a little more softness, or I can dig into my creative juju, and make some amazing art out of this. Those are all possibilities.
Yeah. And then it also makes a sextile to Pluto shortly after that, which just suggests that, okay, if you can resist that instant volatile action, you can fall into that space of a softer space, then it just brings in a certain amount of empowerment. Those are very nice aspects that it makes after you've resisted the volatility. And one of the things in our conversation before we started making this video that Jenny brought up that I just love the idea of, with that Uranus opposing that new moon, is what wakes you up at night? What's that panic in the middle of the night? Because that's what you want to pay attention to. What's the panic that wakes you up? And then what is it that you have to, what's the seed that you plant to support working with that in order to soften it and become more empowered in your manner of moving forward?
Well, I like how you tied those two together, like the idea that the core grain of truth in the midst of the feelings of volatility is the seed you want to plant at this new moon. Because we've been talking about this, like that it's that wake up experience, and you wake up at 2 a.m. and everything seems enormous and terrible, and oh my god, what am I going to do about this thing, and whatever, that comment that was made, or the relationship that's bothering you, or the whatever it is, and then if you can get yourself to go back to sleep, you wake up the next morning and you're like, geez, what was I so freaked out about? Like, it really isn't that big of a deal. I mean, I think that is such a common experience, and there's probably some very clear physiological reasons for that wake up with a start kind of feeling. But nonetheless, it's like what we're talking about here is just having that wake up, recognizing, oh, okay, it's not as terrible as I was thinking in that moment. Like and that now I can actually soften around the situation, figure out what empowered action I need to take, and really out of that get this more sense of healing, or these other softer things that we're talking about. But again, it's not easy. It is having to resist that desire to freak out. But we've probably all had that experience of when you wake up with a start and your heart's hammering, and then you kind of wake up the next day going, it wasn't so bad. And just kind of, but there's something true to it. It doesn't mean that it's not relevant. It just means that it's not quite as insanely volatile as you originally thought.
It's kind of funny that in the middle of the night, our mind knows exactly where to go to get that.
Yeah.
That panic also. But it's, we are looking at this from an individual perspective.
Yeah.
You can find videos out there that talk about this in terms of, what's going on in the world. And there's plenty to wake up in the middle of the night,
Right.
being in a little panic about, but we're really looking at it from more of a personal perspective rather than thinking about the big terrors that are
Yeah.
going on in the world that are clearly reflected in this as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, that's kind of why we're also making those statements about doing natal astrology, because that's mundane astrology where you're looking at world events, and there's going to be things reflected that this new moon in world events that we are all going to see. And there's sort of no avoiding that. But also, we have to go on living our lives in a way that is awake and aware of what's going on, but also we're functioning in our lives and trying to, and also like there's this other piece too that we haven't talked about yet, which the other thing I like about this chart is that Venus is in Libra, and it's in a really nice sextile aspect with Mercury and Sagittarius. And that is that just brings a little more of the ascetic into it, gives you a little bit of space, mental space away from the intensity of everything. And it also introduces the idea of like finding some levity, bringing some beauty into the world in a small way in your daily life. So whether that's putting some fresh flowers on your table just to kind of uplift and brighten things up, and it's not as a way of pretending that all these really hard things aren't existing. It's that there's always this balance of light and dark, and you have to work with that and actively work to say, I need to bring a little more light and levity and beauty into the world today, because there's so many other things going on that are not that are terrible. And so it's a very real statement. It is not about putting your head in the sand. It's about working towards a sense of balance. So I really like that little piece in here. It's really nice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do too. And I like that you brought that up, because that's so important. That's so important. That sextile between Mercury and Venus allows us to express ourselves too, to express how we're feeling about this volatility in the world, and kind of opening our minds, our thinking, and our conversations with others. It's a really dynamic chart, isn't it?
Yeah.
Incredible.
It really it'd be easy to focus on the kind of gloom and doom because it's so intense, but it also brings you right to that razor's edge of like how you're living your life. You're really present to what's going on. You're paying attention. You're tuned in. You need to talk about it. You need to take some kind of action. It's very alive. It's a very alive chart. So
it sure is. Okay, so are we ready to get right on to the personal impacts?
Yes, let's do it.
And we're going to talk about what keeps you awake at night. That's what we're talking about, right, Jenny? Okay.
That's the kickoff.
That's the kickoff. Okay, let's see if I can get this to move. Uh-oh, cat alert.
I love the cat alert.
Cat alert. Okay, I can't get this to move. Oh, I know why. Hold on one moment. I got to close that. Now it'll move. Okay, so if you have Aries rising, this puts the new moon, the Scorpio new moon, in your 8th house. So if we were to think about it from that perspective of where's the volatility, what is it that's keeping you awake at night, we're going to suspect that there's some deep, intense connection with others, somebody else's value system in some way, that your ability to navigate that is really challenging and difficult at this time. So yeah, pay attention to that. What is it that's waking you up around other people's values? And what, when you get clear about it, once you're fully awake and you're not in that panic state, what is the seed that you can plant to set a new boundary? I think this, for those of you with Aries rising, I feel like this is really clearly about setting boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's there's sort of this reckoning process that's happening at the Scorpio new moon, where there's something that's, as you said, there's something that's woken you up, and now you have to kind of understand, like, what does it have to do with? And it has to do with your values and the way you value and, sort of respect yourself. And then what is the relationship or relationships where you need to draw better boundaries? Because quite honestly, you're just not being respected, or you're just not being treated the way you want to be treated, or there's some kind of thing like that. So think about what that is, Aries rising. Think about what is that relationship, or I guess it also could be a process that you need to kind of draw better boundaries with, I mean, that's kind of what we're looking for. And part of that, there's this kind of self-acceptance that comes with it. Like maybe you feel like you kind of let yourself down because you let somebody walk on you or something, and just let that go. If that's something that's happening, there's some way that you need to accept the way you've been in the past in order to liberate you now, where you can create a new pattern and set the boundary you need to set and make that change in the relationship that's been bothering you, something like that.
Yeah, that eighth house is just so interesting because we talk about it as other people's values and all that. And it can go in so many different directions. It can be related to money, other people's money, inheritance. It can be related to your, deep sexual connections with other people. Or, it can be related to how you approach really deep issues of life.
Yeah.
So something in that area, some way in which you need to accept something here.
Yeah. The only other thing I just wanted to add to your list there is just that it could be just bumping up against the different values of your partner. It doesn't, that also is a designation for the eighth house, where you just bump it. Oh, I didn't know you felt that way about that thing, even though you've been married to them for 10 years or something. So that could be another bit.
And it would be those deep values, those things like money, sex, death.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to, you don't want to be cremated? What do you mean? Whatever it is, it's those deep issues that we're talking about. So setting a new boundary is probably what you need to do, but don't do it in reaction. Don't do it in haste. Let it sit a little while. Make sure you're fully awake and not in that middle of the night panic state.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so let's move on to those with Taurus rising.
So those of you with Taurus rising, the Scorpio season has been happening in your 7th house of partnerships. So it suggests that there's something that you need to wake up to, or something that's woken you up, I should say, that has to do with your partnerships. Again, we mentioned in the beginning of this video, this idea of like waking up in the middle of the night and feeling, oh my God, this terrible thing's happening. And then having to kind of go back to sleep and then wake up the next morning and go, well, that wasn't so bad. I did freak out, but that wasn't really that bad. And now, what do I need to learn from that? Like now, what do I need to wake up to that was bothering me at 2 a.m.? That is a core piece of truth that I need to think about and ruminate on a little bit, and then take some sort of action that has to do with one of your partnerships. Again, this could be business partnerships. This might be your spouse. This could be any one-on-one type of relationship that you're in. So that is where there's going to be some kind of panic wake-up call of some kind of action that you need to take. I mean, that's essentially what's going on for Taurus rising.
Yeah. I don't know what else I want to add to that. It's just there's some new way of being in that relationship that is coming from, it's really coming from a new awareness about yourself.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I see that I need independence in some new way, and it's suddenly making me suspicious or anxious about my partnership. But just pause with that, sit with that, get the clarity of what it is about yourself that's making you question or feel uncomfortable in some way in a partnership of some sort. And then, setting a new seed to do things a different way, to maybe go deeper in that partnership in some manner.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good reminder, Lori, too. Like that idea that in the 1st and the 7th house, there's a lot of mirroring that happens. So it's very easy to project what is actually going on for you internally onto your partner. And there's a great amount of learning there. And it's not always the easiest to see. But that's really, you're right. This process is, again, it's about you and the way you relate to your partner. I mean, at least that's really what we're looking at. Because it's in opposition with Uranus, there's definitely some kind of action that has to happen. There's some kind of, conversation or parrying that might need to happen with a partner. So,
and like we talked about in the first part of the video, with that, the sextile between Mercury and Venus, conversations are easier to have once you've gotten through that that middle of the night kind of terror. Like, oh my God. But there is a bit of an ease right now in conversation. So you might be really able to engage in a conversation easier than you think.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean,
there you have
now's
it.
you're right. Now's a good time. Now my cat has jumped up on my lap.
Well, I have my feather thing that I'm doing with my other hand. It's yeah, having a cat and doing videos is a
Yes,
tricky
I know.
business.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so now we're moving on to those with Gemini rising. And this, if you've got Gemini rising, this wake up call, or this the middle of the night panic that's happening with this extremely volatile new moon would be happening in your sixth house. The sixth house is our day-to-day routines of caring for ourselves, of self-care, health issues. Maybe your middle of the night fear had something to do with your health, or something, some awareness that you're not taking care of yourself the way that you need to be. So, rather than taking a instant middle of the night panic action, you want to give it a little time, hold on, think about it, get clear about what it is, what the reality is. There's some way in which your subconscious mind is really trying to wake you up to a change that needs to happen in your day-to-day routines, right?
Yeah.
So think about that. What is the seed that you want to plant for a new health routine of some sort?
Yeah. And I think what we've been talking about here with Uranus opposite that is like, it's the worst case scenario is that you wake up and you freak out and you do something extreme. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is wake up and just allow yourself an internal process around what is really going on, what is at the core of what's bothering you, because it's that whole easy thing of really being very upset and triggered at the middle of the night, and then you kind of realize, no, I just need to make the shift. I just need to slow down on the sugar. I mean, maybe it's something like that you see it's taking you in a longer path direction you don't want to go in. It's that sort of simplicity that we're talking about in this video, just like what shift needs to occur that is better for your long-term health, and what, there's some kind of, the awakening is coming from a very deep subconscious type of place, and hence it's perfect to think about it happening in the middle of the night.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And the first thing is to get clear, is there a real incredible concern, or is it just you need to cut back on your sugar?
Yeah, exactly.
Getting clear on what it is, what you need to do about it. And yes, you do need to take an action, but you need to pause and not take a fast, unthought out action.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the other thing we've been mentioning is just as an acceptance here. What do you need to accept so that you can shift?
Right. Do you need a new doctor's appointment? Do you need to set up a doctor's appointment? Do you need to quit sugar? Whatever the heck it is. Okay. I think that covers Gemini.
We got the point across.
I think we got the point across. Okay, let's move on.
Okay. So with Cancer rising, the Scorpio season and this Scorpio new moon is happening in your 5th house of creativity. As a reminder, the 5th house is where you give of yourself in an unconditional way. It's where you pour yourself into a creative project, or you just set aside your routines and play with, your kids, like yours or someone else's, but really getting in touch with that playful energy. It's also a place where you might be taking risks, and with Scorpio here, those risks are going to be, they're going to have an emotional attachment as well. There's some way that you have to really take an emotional risk in the 5th house here.
Mhm.
So that's where this new moon is happening. There's some kind of wake up call at the new moon, or some kind of way that you're, or waking up in the middle of the night where you're like, oh, what's going on? I have this kind of stress around certain things, and then you hopefully go back to sleep. And as you wake up the next morning, you can start going, what's the core piece in that? What is the thing? Like, do I need to start this whole different creative project? Do I need to spend more time with my children because I'm not? These are the kinds of questions that you might really kind of get at, like the core piece. Or is there a risk that I need to take that I'm not taking? Or am I overdoing risk in another place? So those are some of the questions you might want to think about. And the goal is to identify what that is, and then you can plant a new seed at the Scorpio new moon of how you want to handle that. And the other thing I'll say here is, I think part of that wake up call is going to come from your community. And that's because Uranus is in the 11th house opposing. So it's almost like the community has a demand of you, like it needs you, it needs something from you, something about your creative process. Or there's some interplay, or whether you're letting the community change you or you're trying to change it.
I love that polarity between the 5th and the 11th house. It's really lovely to think about that, and to think about something in the community waking you up to the actions you need to be taking in your own creative process, or in how you give of yourself. And I think we talked earlier about, possibly through your community, you're seeing where you can support other people's children. Or, I mean, there's so many different ways that this can show up. That 5th house is the area of how you give of yourself, and whether that, and yeah, your creative process. And certainly if you have children, that is a creative process. Raising a child is not much, that's more of a creative process than that. Love affairs are part of that, but there's some way in which there's some stress that's happening here at this new moon that's waking you up in the middle of the night of, oh my God, do I need to have children? Do I not need to have children? Do I need to support the children that my friends have? Do I need to not go on that skydiving trip next week? Or do I need to set that up? There's something in that. You don't want to take a direct instant action on any of that stress that wakes you up in the middle of the night, or that just feels like, oh my God. You want to sit and watch it and get clear about what the action is, plant the seed, and yeah, just kind of accept what it is.
Yeah.
If you were really looking forward to that skydiving trip, but you really see that your anxiety is such that it wouldn't be healthy for you, regardless of if all your community members are going on that skydiving trip, you might need to just set the seed of, I'm doing what's right for me in my creative, risky process.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting because Scorpio really does bring in that kind of do or die piece, where it's really down to what is the essential core truth of whatever woke you up, and then what clear action do you need to take to deal with it. And then on top of that, there's a self-acceptance piece here, which is harder to kind of get to, that comes a little bit later or afterwards, of just kind of saying, where have I been and where do I want to go? It's not about, it's very easy to be very harsh with this sort of contact, and that is not, but fortunately with the moon trining Neptune, as we mentioned in the beginning of the video, that kind of brings in the softer potential for healing as well. So that's where that kind of, you're not trying to beat yourself up, but just let yourself transform into a new direction, and to have a sense of kindness towards yourself.
That's really lovely. It's really lovely to think of planting a new seed in the 5th house. I just love thinking about that, because planting a seed in the 5th house is planting a seed for a new creative process. So yeah, just like setting the stress aside, figuring out what the thing is, planting the seed, move on. Okay. I think we're done with Cancer rising. Let's move on to those of you with Leo rising. So this puts this incredibly volatile and powerful new moon in your 4th house. The 4th house is the area that speaks of our home, our ancestry, our family. really it's a very deep internal area for all of us, the fourth house. And if you've got Leo rising, there's something in that that is creating this volatile energy of waking you up in the middle of the night, however you want to think about that. But if you suddenly feel like, oh my God, I've got to take action on something that involves my home and family, and there's a lot of stress behind it, a lot of anxiety behind it, a lot of fear behind it, it's really important that you just settle into it before, get clear about what the issue is, and wait for the panic to pass before you determine exactly what the seed is that you're going to plant. So how do you think about that, Jenny?
Yeah, well, I like everything you're saying. It totally makes sense. And I just kind of just have this image with the Scorpio of like really getting into what is like, I keep thinking, I guess, about the grain of sand in the oyster, this irritant that gets in there, and really trying to get at what is that core piece, because there's a lot of drama and intensity built up around the feelings and the triggers and whatever else is going on there. But if you can just, as you said, calm that and really extract the core truth that is really trying to make itself known to you. And it's like, it hasn't been clear. And that's probably why there's been such a big drama process buildup around it, because it's trying to get your attention. And so now you just need to get into that core piece. And then from that, then you can decide what action that you want to take. And when you do that process that way, that action is going to be an empowered action, because it's bringing your self-knowledge, your self-awareness, you're planting that seed. And it really is going to make a big difference in whatever is going on at the foundation of either your family life or your personality, or just some other lineage or land sort of issue or home issue. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, so that seed could be anything from, a new conversation, a deeper conversation with a family member. It could be something about your actual home. It could be around buying a new home or putting a home on the market, some seed around your home, a connection with a family member, maybe a new cousin that you discovered through DNA testing that you're going to contact, something along those lines. So think about what that action is and plant the seed once you've settled the intensity around it.
Yeah, and then the final piece of it kind of goes along with that tail end of settling the intensity, which is that with the Neptune contact to the moon, there's also an opportunity for forgiveness here. There's an opportunity for kindness. There's an opportunity for empathy. So even though it's an abrupt, somewhat harsh contact, there's also this idea that you don't have to forget about being able to you can be clear and still be kind, and I think that really is suggested in this chart as well, of just having that ability to, I don't know, soften the blow or just think about it from other people's perspective too.
Or that, there's something in the blow that ultimately, if you manage it properly, is just opening a door to compassion and empowerment with the connection to Pluto following as well. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to those of us with Virgo rising.
Okay, so with Virgo rising, this powerful Scorpio new moon is happening in your third house. The third house is your local environment. So it's how you communicate in that local environment. It's how you navigate, through transportation. It's how you move through your local environment, your neighborhood, your corner store. All of those things are third house considerations. And there's a lot in here about how you use your voice. So the Scorpio new moon, whatever the thing is that might have woken you up in the middle of the night with a gasp of air, it's something to do with the way that you communicate. It could also be, you got to think about communicating who with. It might be a sibling, it might be a neighbor, it might be that you said something snarky at the grocery store to the cashier by mistake or whatever. But you want to, that's where the kind of anxiety is coming from, like some kind of wake up around like, ooh, that didn't go so well. And the idea here is you want to let that initial intensity calm. You know, if it was something that woke you up in the middle of the night, you know, hopefully got some sleep and then woke up the next morning thinking, oh, you know, it's not so bad. It isn't so bad. I just need to get clear about what is the core piece, you know, what is the absolute central grain of sand in this whole anxiety thing that I actually need to act on for my empowerment. So,
Right.
yeah. What
So
about you?
yeah. Well, it's interesting to think about that in terms of what would the issue be in the third house. And yeah, it's about your voice. It's about how you I find that third house connection with our voice and our siblings and neighbors to be such an interesting connection.
Yeah.
Because we, our communications in those kind of everyday relationships like sibling, those relationships, I feel like the relationships of the third house are the relationships with people we don't choose. We don't choose who we're interacting with in the grocery store. We don't choose our siblings or our neighbors. So it's a very different, it's a very different kind of communication. So what is the anxiety in that? And
Yeah.
what is because there's an intensity in it with Scorpio. There's such an intensity. And finding the, what is it you're afraid of in the middle of the night? The communications that you've already had, the communications you want to have. Um, planting
Yeah.
a seed. This is mine, and I think I'm processing it in a different way because I've got Virgo rising, and I'm trying to really understand this.
Yeah.
Maybe
It's
I need to have a new communication, and I know at least one of my siblings is listening to this.
well, I think this one's kind of funny because it's like we're saying that you're getting a communication and nocturnal freak out middle of the night communication about your communication.
Right,
You know, so
right.
there's a message here. I mean, there's a strong message, and it's almost like what do you need to do with that message? You have to deliver it somewhere else. It needs to get passed on somewhere else. There's some other way you need to communicate. I mean, that's the nature of messages, you know?
And then again, the wake up call is coming from the ninth house. So it's something in your higher understanding that's kind of narrowing in on this communication or this voice piece,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think, yeah. And it's
I
easy
think it's the wake up is from my publisher as far as a personal thing. It's like,
you're like, hey. Yeah.
hey,
And well, I was going to say the third house is more sort of mundane and ordinary. You know, the third house is the daily interactions, the texting, and then this and that. And then that ninth house is the bigger impact
right.
of what you're talking about. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So plant a seed for going deeper in your day-to-day conversations, perhaps. It's something in that. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we've beaten that one to death as much as we're going to. And we're going to move on now to those with Libra rising. So if you've got Libra rising, this new moon is happening, this incredibly dynamic, intense, and challenging new moon is happening in your second house, which is really the area of the chart that relates to your self-worth, your self-esteem, your relationship to money and resources. And it's always interesting to me how those two, those things come together, how your finances relate to your self-worth. So there's something in that has you metaphorically waking up in the middle of the night with this kind of fear and panic. Maybe you're worried about your resources, your money. Maybe you're worrying about what's happening with the friggin' stock market. I don't know. But there's something very intense occurring there that you feel this need to take immediate action on. So you want to just kind of pause and let the dust settle a little bit in order to get really clear about what the issue is and how you want to respond to it rather than responding to it with just immediate heat.
Yeah. And, based on a lot of client conversations I feel like I've had recently, like to me, there's an anxiety about self-worth. I mean, that is a clear statement. And
Yeah.
especially with Scorpio, because yeah, I mean, this totally could be your money and your resources, on that level. But with Scorpio here, it's like deep down, there is an intensity around what you are really worth. What resources do you personally really bring to your life, to the people around you? And I think there's a core question here that can be pretty intense, and at this new moon, it's like you really have this opportunity to wake up to it in a new way and see it in the light of like, and how does it impact other people? Because you've got Uranus in the 8th house opposite that, kind of waking you up to like other people's values are kind of hanging out over here, letting you see, well, what are my values? I mean, there's a mirroring that's happening with these polarities. And it's a really wonderful opportunity, not an easy opportunity, but a wonderful opportunity, I think, to reset that self-worth and use the other aspects that are in this chart that we talked about at the beginning of this video to soften, to accept, to slow down so you can see what the thing is, and then give yourself window of time to accept and soften to it, and use some kindness here towards yourself in order to plant a new seed so that you can go off in a much more empowered new direction. I mean, what an opportunity. That's kind of how I see this one.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about that. I just love that connection with the polarity there. My money, my resources, my self-worth, and then other people. So there's something in other people's values, other people's resources that's really waking you up to your own. And yeah, the time to plant a seed for a deeper development of what your self-worth is. I guess I'm just basically reiterating what we've already said twice.
Oh, well, I think we probably do that a lot, but hey, you know what? We don't always get things on the first time. So
Right.
I think
right.
there's a good important process around sort of the self in general here for Libra rising. So
Yeah, I love
yeah.
that. I love those two houses because it's so easy to think of it on the very, surface level of my money and your money and resources, but going deeper into what does that mean about me and what my value is? What
Yeah.
my real understanding of my own value is. It
Yeah.
doesn't really have anything to do with money and resources, but there's that metaphorical mirror there where we see that. Okay, so let's move on to those folks who have Scorpio rising. Woo!
Whew, look at this. Okay, so Scorpio rising, this is happening in your first house. And, no matter what your ascendant degree is at, this is going to be a very powerful time for Scorpio rising because your ascendant degree is in your first house. So no matter what, this is a sensitive point here. So this is a very powerful moment in time that has to do with, honestly, some sort of awakening that's happening for you to do with your partnerships and who you are in partnerships and how you show up in your partnerships, like what you bring. There's something very potent about all of those questions. And we've been talking about the Scorpio new moon as kind of like this, that anxiety ridden wake up that happens in the middle of the night where you're going, oh my God, all these crazy things are happening and I don't know what to do. And I'm really overwhelmed. And maybe you get back to sleep or maybe you don't. But then hopefully you wake up in the morning and this, maybe the sun has risen and you start going, okay, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad like what I was doing. But as you evaluate that process and give yourself some time, take some deep breaths, you can really get at what is the core truth that midnight or 2 a.m. wake up is trying to get you to see, and the core truth has something to do with yourself and some directional shift that you may really want to make at this time, and so that's kind of what you want to plant the seed for at the Scorpio new moon is this total possibility of a direction shift. So yeah, pretty powerful though.
Yeah, it's very powerful in the first house. It really, what is that? You want to really think about it. What is the fear in the middle of the night? It's something about it's something so personal. How do I express myself? And how do I see myself as a reflection of my relationship as well? How do people see me due to who I'm in partnership with? There might be something in that. You see couples all the time where, you know one person and you know them in a certain particular way, and then you meet their partner and it forces you to see them in a totally different way. You know what I mean, Jenny?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's
Great.
something in that, and there's something for you with Scorpio rising of really thinking about, how am I seen because of the people, not necessarily your marriage or, but possibly depending on what your major relationships are in your life. Maybe you are in a position where you're suddenly noticing that you're being judged by your business partner, and maybe you need to plant a seed to change that. There's something here about planting a seed to be seen in a way that truly empowers you. And the reflection somehow comes from some relationship.
Yeah. And the other piece we've been kind of adding in here is that it's likely that this might feel really, really urgent, and you do not want to immediately take the action that first comes to your mind. You really want to give yourself a little window of time for some kind of internal process where you can really identify what is the core piece that you do need to act on. And that's going to, that is for your empowerment. If you take that action, it's going to be an empowered action because you've taken the time to reflect on what it is, rather than, it'd be pretty easy to be really reactive here. Uranus opposite Mars is a pretty intense setup. So very easy for that. So you really want to resist that initial urge. Give yourself some time, go for your walk in the woods that morning or whatever, so that you can really understand, what did you learn from that anxiety-ridden moment in the middle of the night? Like, what is it trying to communicate to you? Because it's absolutely important for your transformation. And there's a piece here about self-acceptance too, where you've got to kind of recognize like where you've come from and where you want to go, and do that without harsh judgment, but more of a, maybe a little more of a reality look, but also with some softness and for your healing. So it's a tall order.
It is a tall order. I think one of the tallest orders in this particular new moon is resisting the urge for instant action. Slowing yourself down, and especially with it there in your first house. It's a tricky thing for sure. Okay.
Time.
I think we're ready to move on to those who have Sagittarius rising. And this is going to put this incredibly dynamic and difficult Scorpio new moon in your 12th house. This is tricky indeed. So you want to really get clear. I mean, one of the ways we've been talking about this new moon is to think about what wakes you up in the middle of the night. What's that? Oh my God, I need to take action. There's something really difficult and challenging going on here. For you, this is happening in the deepest levels of your unconscious thought patterns. It could be in, I think of that 12th house as very much playing out in either a psychological manner or a spiritual manner, but there's something going on in there that has you in a state of feeling like you have to take some immediate action.
Interesting.
This is a difficult one to think through because it's in that hidden house of your unconscious, but there's some deep issue there that's asking for your attention, and for you to plant a new seed of opening your awareness to what is creating some of those unconscious actions. What do you think? I'm kind of grappling here, Jenny.
Well, I know it's kind of funny because it's almost like, we're setting up the scene for you where we're talking about you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and there's this thing, and that's not going to happen to every single person listening to this, but you can probably think of a time when that has happened to you. Because what we're trying to get at, especially with the 12th house, this is something coming from the depths that is trying to wake you up. And so this is going to come, I think, yes, this is going to come through sleep, because the 12th house is like your sleep, you know, it's like the dream space, you know, so there's something, this really is coming from those depths that is not very easy to identify. And you're going to have to really work with these other dimensions, in a sense that we don't really, in our Western society, we sort of act like this doesn't really exist or something, but there's something really important that is emerging, and it is going to come through probably your sleep or through some serious alone time, that you have an understanding of what is that thing. And I suppose it might be possible too with the Scorpio new moon for Sagittarius rising. This is it's even more important that you really, really slow down, because that's what we're saying. You have this kind of anxiety, you know, and then you slow down and you start understanding like, what is the core piece? And I think could be harder to get at. But the other interplay here is Uranus is in your 6th house of routines. So this is something you need to change about your tangible daily routines as well. You know, it isn't just this way far out thing. It's that getting the information might be tricky, but then it is going to be something that really can make your routines and practices quite different than what you were doing before.
Yeah, it's like there's something in that deep inner self that you need to, if you just think about it very simply in terms of you need to plant a seed in those internal depths, that could play out in any number of ways. You know, maybe you need a new therapist. You know, maybe you need to just start some inner exploration. So look for some sort of a self-help book, some sort of a spiritual something that's gonna plant a seed in there, some way to plant a seed for internal growth.
I was going to say, I think something else we've been mentioning through these is this need for self-acceptance. And I would definitely say here, this is a need for radical self-acceptance, to really, really, you know, accept yourself on a totally different level. I mean, I think that's very appropriate to this 12th house, because there's something about the 12th house helps you develop trust with like the universe, you know, that there's a sense of like, you have a place in the universe and things happen for a reason and you're part of this fabric. But these are all 12th house things. So I think there's something in these big picture ways of thinking about things that is going to help you understand. Because I think more than even any of the other rising signs, the whole self-acceptance thing might be extra important here, to accept what's going on right now, because the only way you can really change anything is to start with accepting exactly where you are right now. And I mean, that's one of the basic spiritual premises. And it's the irony, right? Like, I want to change this thing. Okay, step one, you need to completely accept where you are. Right. You know, it's like, wait, but I'm trying to change the thing. Like, you can't do that yet. Right. So this speaks to me in that way more than any of the others.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I, you know, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about the Uranus and Mars opposition here tied in. And it's just like, this is a really, those of you with Sagittarius rising, this could be just such a deep level of anxiety that arises at this time. That whole panic in the middle of the night is just, you might not have a clue what it is. It could just come at you as, you know, some sort of an internal panic attack kind of sense. And exactly that self-acceptance is all you can do here. And planting a seed for self-acceptance. I mean, that's really is all you want to do here. And if you can plant that seed for self-acceptance, the rest of it will grow out of there. The Neptune brings in, you know, compassion for yourself, and then the empowerment of Pluto as the moon continues past this new moon.
Yeah,
I think it's a very powerful one with Sagittarius rising. It's a powerful thing to have in the 12th house. For sure.
I think, you know, another keyword we haven't put in there, but that might be helpful. This really is a surrender.
Yes.
real surrender to whatever. And from that surrender is where the transformation comes from. So when you plant the seed for surrendering, essentially here in the 12th house, that is when you will start seeing something shift. So
It's so funny.
that's it.
As you're saying that, and I know we're going on and on for Sagittarius rising here, but I remember like early on in my studies getting this thing in my head that wherever Scorpio is in your chart is an area of your life where throughout the course of your life you have to go through such powerful transformations in that area. And when you throughout the course of your life have to go through major transformations in your unconscious being, that's pretty powerful stuff. So yeah, it's a powerful time for those of you with Sagittarius rising. So we're going to go on before we continue for another hour.
I know.
We're going to talk about people with Capricorn rising.
So those of you with Capricorn rising, this powerful, potent Scorpio new moon is happening in your 11th house of community, of groups, of kind of your hopes and aspirations, were sort of the older ways of looking at the 11th house. I really do like to think of it as, if the simplest keyword for me would be groups, those places where you're involved with groups of people. So the Scorpio new moon is really giving you maybe a wake-up call, or it's that whole middle of the night anxiety, oh, what's going on thing. And for you, it has to do with your community. And there's a lot of things that are where community can be loaded. I mean, you might not feel a part of your community. You might wish for a different community. You might not know who your community is. I mean, these are all possible things. This is not the clearest thing per se. But at any rate, whatever is waking you up in the middle of the night with Capricorn rising, it has to do with those groups. So it might be that there's just something totally new and different that needs to happen here, but before you're going to even know what any of that is, you've got to kind of focus in on what is the core truth that is behind any anxiety you feel about this part of your life. Like, what is the grain of sand that is in the middle of that really is the truth, that isn't so big and dramatic as maybe you think, and if you can get to that, that's where you want to plant a new seed at the Scorpio new moon, or something different in your community. But it really is an internal process first, where you need to get clear internally about what that core piece is for you before you take action. So there's a danger here of reacting, and of being totally volatile. And that is not the best use of this.
Yeah, you want to really take a pause and get clear about what it is, what the change needs to happen. Yeah, with Mars in there is that tendency, like you're saying, Jenny, there's that tendency to take a fast action, like, oh, my community's not supporting me, throw out the baby with the bathwater. And you don't want to do that. You want to pause and think about what really needs to change. What does community mean to you? If you have Capricorn rising, that's the first question. What does community mean to you? What is it about that has you in a state of anxiety right now? And like you said, I love that you brought up, the old thoughts of the 11th house as your aspirations, your hopes and dreams for the future is what they used to call it. The 11th house, your hopes and dreams for the future. And really what the community are the people that support you, not necessarily your friends, definitely not your family. But the outside community that supports you to what your desires are. So you sort of have to think about what your desires are and who supports you. Do you have the support that you need for what you are trying to create in your life? Is there something about that support or the community itself that is creating this anxiety? And what do you need to do to get it more aligned with what you need?
Yeah, I mean, with Capricorn rising and having Scorpio in the 11th house, like, there is an intensity for you around community. There needs to be a purpose, or there's some deeper or even occult or, something totally different type of feeling for you in community. I mean, there's something really intense here that you're looking to get met. And I think it's appropriate to really add in here that piece of like, there's an acceptance process. Like maybe the community isn't who you thought it was going to be. Maybe you are doing something completely different and out of the box that you never had even thought of before, so there might be a way that you just need to kind of accept where you are right now with whatever's going on with, your lacking community or over community or whatever it is, and just get clear about that. And so then you can take an action to further enhance what you're doing or to change what you're doing. And that's where there's some transformation available.
I love that, the whole idea of acceptance. And, with Uranus being in the 5th house, I was thinking as you were saying that maybe there's some creativity that you bring to your community that isn't being received in the way that you want it to be, or you feel like you need it to be. And, just accepting how the community does support you. It's that whole idea of, you can't move forward until you accept where you are now. So once you accept it, then you can figure out what is the seed I'm planting for an improvement or a change or a transformation in this area. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to move on to folks with Aquarius rising, and this will put this incredibly powerful and somewhat challenging, or quite challenging, new moon into your 10th house. So where you're planting a seed and where you're having a great deal of anxiety, probably that middle of the night kind of anxiety, is something about what you bring to the world, something about your career, your vocation, your purpose. What is it that is waking you up here in the middle of the night? And what do you need to slow your action down around? With Mars and Uranus in opposition tied into this new moon, there is that tendency to feel like you have to take action right now. You wake up in the middle of the night, you're in a panic attack, something about your career and how it impacts you. Slow down. You don't need to, and you don't want to take that immediate action. If you can resist it and slow down and accept exactly where your career is right now, then you can step back and figure out what's the seed for a new path here, or a tweak in the direction.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting is thinking about with Scorpio, it's so sort of stark. It's like getting at the core truth. Like when you're really honest with yourself, like really deeply honest, what is going on in your profession that, as you just said, Lori, just needs some kind of adjustment. And again, I mean, it depends. If you have major things in your 10th house here, or your 4th house, maybe you are making a major change, to things. But it also could just be just a subtle adjustment. But in any case, your job is to kind of get clear without being sort of reactive, get clear about what that is, and then make a decision about what kind of empowered action you would like to take that will make that adjustment. That's kind of what is happening with Mars in Scorpio in your 10th house too. So this things around that. The other piece is just taking a look at where you're at now, accepting what's going on, warts and all, maybe the stuff that you're not as happy with and you really want to make change with. Well, you just need to accept that all of this is just where you are right now. Some of it may be a stepping stone to something else. You don't know yet, but the key is to just accept this is where I'm at. And then you can take that empowered action with a sense of clarity and purpose, where you've done the work, you've kind of examined yourself, like your emotional self, and you're clear about what you're doing. That's really what this new moon could be super helpful for.
I think another thing that this makes me think about is just there's always an issue of integrity where Scorpio is too. So just being really clear around the seed that you're planting being one of deep integrity. I think that's worth mentioning here as well. So at any rate, don't take that immediate first direct crazy action that the wake up in the middle of the night makes you feel like, oh my God, I've got to jump off this bridge or do this thing instantly. You don't. You need to accept where you are, be clear about your own level of integrity, and figure out what the seed is that you're going to plant to move forward there. Okay. Moving right on to Pisces rising.
So with Pisces rising, this Scorpio new moon is happening in your 9th house of your worldview, your higher wisdom. The other thing this house can imply is something to do with teachers, something to do with, or even the law is another signification of the 9th house, or religion. So a lot of topics in this 9th house, but in any case, what you're going to want to do is think about what is the thing that wakes you up at night, that makes you feel anxious. And I mean, certainly up here with Scorpio up here, there's a very good chance that world events can be very disturbing and triggering to you personally. So let's just, get that right out in the open, that could be part of this. But at any rate, what you're really going to want to do is get clear about what is the core truth when you're completely honest with yourself. What is at the core of that anxiety? Like after you've kind of, you've woken up in that panic state, hopefully you've gone back to sleep and you wake up the next morning and you have a little bit better of a perspective and you can kind of see what is the thing that's really causing me distress or is causing me upset that I've been, maybe trying to ignore and I just can't anymore. So that's kind of the first piece, because you really want to give yourself time to understand what that is before you take any kind of action. Because the danger here is that you're going to freak out and go out and do something really extreme when you don't really need to do that at this point. You really need to allow for the internal process to have some kind of clarity, and then you can plant the seed for, change, transformation that you wish to see at the Scorpio new moon to do with your worldview. So, yeah.
It's interesting to think about that. What is the new seed? What is the change in your worldview that is occurring here? There's something there. There's something, and you can think of, like you said, all the things going on in the world. There's so much to consider. But the 9th house is also, it's about education. It's about educating yourself. Maybe if you're really in this state of panic or being triggered around things that are happening in the outer world, maybe you need to, get more educated about what the issues are behind the things that are really causing a lot of anxiety. I know that, with the world in the state it's in, many of us have worldviews that aren't really connected with a deep understanding of what's really, the history or whatever. I could go down a rabbit hole here. But for those of you with Pisces rising, maybe if you've got some real concerns around your worldview and how you need to change it, maybe there's some education that you need to work on before you can really plant the seed for change.
Yeah, I'm glad you put it like that, Lori, because there is something about some learning that needs to happen with it being the 9th house and then Uranus cruising through your 3rd house. There is some kind of educational component here, and it could play out something like, you learn something you didn't expect from your neighbor, or you have a conversation with the cashier, and well, let's think about this, at the grocery store, and it wakes you up to like something about that you haven't taken on board before, some way that you can actually picture someone else's point of view in a new way, some way that you can see that you're kind of just following along with what some kind of demagogue is feeding you that is not you thinking critically for yourself. And so, I mean, this is a great time of reckoning for you to really take a look at what is really, really the core piece of what's bothering you or disrupting you, and then learn more about that. Plant a seed to have a greater understanding of what that core truth is about. I mean, I think that's a great use for this.
I think so too. I think that that's a really interesting one to think about that way. I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're about, go kindly, Pisces. Be kind to
Yeah.
yourself, Pisces rising, as you go through that intense process.
Yeah.
But I think that yeah.
I'm going to say one more thing. I'm glad that you
Okay.
said that. Be kind with yourself about this. If you all of a sudden realize, oh my God, there's some panic about maybe my worldview has been wrong in some way, that's okay. Start where you are, accept yourself where you are, plant a little seed. You don't have to change everything overnight. You really don't. Plant a new seed to grow in understanding, which will in time broaden your worldview. So
Nice. Well said.
very nice, everyone. Thank you. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks,
Thanks,
Jenny. This
Lori.
was fun.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Let's see.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out how to end this.